Hey there, it's time for the show, the Tatiana Show, where you make friends and talk life and crypto. Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very long-awaited episode of the Tatiana Show. So before I bring on my esteemed guest, I have wanted to do a show with my good friend Adam V. Levine for ages. He and I have been working on tokens since 2013. We were starting to iterate on them, and we've not only been very good friends, but also we've worked on a lot of different tech and had a lot of different experiences. And so with the advent of all these people talking about tokens and NFTs and all these kinds of things, I thought it would be great to take a trip down memory lane and give an analysis of what's gone on so far, what's attractive, what's possible, what's not, and maybe a little bit of why. But, you know, as I invited Adam onto the show, I realized that the Bitcoin price was $10,760 at the moment of taping. So it's obviously pumping. And we're sitting here talking to one of my teammates, Frank. And before we go into the token stuff, Adam had some very good advice because a lot of the people are watching this show and they're thinking, I got to go out and buy some Bitcoin, which I agree with. But you have a method that you've learned in your years as an OG crypto person. So before you tell us the answer, thanks so much for joining us on the show today, Adam.
Thanks for having me, Tatiana. It's been a long time coming.
Absolutely. So for people who are not familiar with Adam, he is the founder of Let's Talk Bitcoin, the original crypto podcast, in my opinion, the best, with a lot of my really good friends, of course, on there. He's also the head of podcasting now at CoinDesk. But he also started out with the Let's Talk Bitcoin network ages ago, where we did a lot of different experiments. So before we go down memory lane, what have you learned about buying Bitcoin and selling Bitcoin?
Well, so not financial advice up front. But so the price, again, like the price has been kind of teasing around this $10,000 mark for the last, couple of weeks, couple of months. This morning we broke through, and then as we were starting to kind of record this, we saw that actually the price is up another $500 since kind of we were looking right before we started recording. And Frank was talking about, wanting to buy some Bitcoin, and we were kind of going down that little rabbit hole. And it's not uncommon advice, but just again, in cryptocurrency, the experience of opportunity cost is so tangible. And the longer you're in the space, kind of the more you feel it. It's really, really hard to time the market. So we were just talking about how even though now seems like the time to do it so you don't kind of miss the boat, a better strategy is to think about it a little bit longer term, and to, instead of kind of just trying to buy now to get in right before, this the run up to $20,000 or whatever, might happen or might not. Well, chances are pretty good the price is going to go down as well as the price tends to do. So it's a better strategy, at least for your sanity over the medium term, to just take kind of like a set amount of money that you want to put into this asset, and then to, on a like regular schedule, once a week or once a month or kind of whatever cadence you're looking for, set that up to have it as an automatic trade on an exchange or Coinbase or something like that, so that you can not have to experience the joy on one side when you get it right, but also the just unfathomable pain on the other side when you get it wrong. And instead of kind of relying on your own judgment of what the market is going to do, which is almost always going to be wrong because the market is kind of a reflection of everybody making that calculation at once. Instead, you kind of take yourself out of it, and you just say, all right, well, this is the day that I buy on. It doesn't matter what the price is. And over the course of a year, I'm going to wind up getting a good aggregate deal, compared to trying to time market. So Frank, I wish you luck as someone who's been in crypto for a long time to someone who's relatively, it sounds like, getting into it. It's it's a big challenge, but rewarding if you can withstand it.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm just bullish as heck, and I'm just spending all my money on Bitcoin. Any little
You're always
pennies.
bullish, Tatiana.
I
I've never
know.
known you to not be bullish.
That's true. I am. I don't think that that's a good technique, though, when trading.
Like I said, the opportunity cost thing is so tangible for me. Like, again, there are multiple fortunes that I've missed out on as a result of trying to be too smart and time things. So these days I try to engage my brain as little as possible, and really I just mostly don't do anything, right? Like, you've got what you've got, that is what it is, and then the question just is moon or no. Moon or no? I'm still
Yeah.
waiting to figure that one out, but good directionality today at least.
Well, by the time that this show airs, we'll see where the price is,
Yeah,
right?
we'll see if that was good advice I've given to Frank or not.
I don't think so. I think Frank needs to march over to the Bitcoin ATM pronto. And one of the things that stinks about this is that it takes some time to get set up with Coinbase, and certain credit cards, maybe they don't jive. There's a lot of changes going on in the industry. It'll be probably a lot easier in the future, but while it's not, it's probably good for us.
Well, so the Black Thursday crash, just to put one more pin in this, the Black Thursday crash, like, I've had an account with Coinbase for like 6 years, something like that, right? Never had a problem using it before. Black Thursday comes, I'm like, oh my God, I've got the funds sitting there from when I liquidated before. And I go to buy, nothing, can't get anything. So,
Oof.
like, that's the other thing, is that when stuff like this happens, Coinbase tends to not work. Coinbase is like, yeah, the price is moving a lot. We're just broken right now. So again, like, you really kind of have to already be in position by the time the plane takes off. And if not, it's pretty difficult to suddenly jump on and grab a seat while we're already in the air.
Yeah, well, I think I'm going to give some family friends a lesson in Bitcoin over the weekend, and
Good
I'm starting a
luck with that.
newly revised Bitcoin 101 series. So I'll let you
Nice.
know what I come up with, and we could share it with the audience too. But let's
Sounds
get
good.
down to brass tacks. Okay, so do we want to talk about your awesome time over at CoinDesk, or are we just going to dive right into the token stuff?
I think let's save the CoinDesk topic for another one, because frankly, I'm pretty interested in this whole artist coin thing that you've been talking about.
Oh, very good. Well, this is definitely my closest to my heart crypto project since it's Tatiana Coin. But back in the day, we met in October of 2013,
Yep.
and you recall a conversation that I apparently don't recall. I'm
Well,
not sure why, but tell us about how this all started and where everybody was going, because my first memory was people saying Bitcoin 2.0, Bitcoin 2.0, and hearing about what that would look like. We weren't even saying blockchain back then.
no, we weren't really. I mean, like, blockchain wasn't really the focus. It really was all about Bitcoin at that point, for sure. And it was like Bitcoin on one side and then altcoins on the other side, right? So this was before kind of the advent of what we call meta token protocols today, which is basically the ability to have a token that doesn't require a blockchain that has its own miners on it, right? So in the world of Bitcoin, the first thing we saw was Mastercoin, now called Omni. It had just funded, I believe, the month before that. And so it was kind of in first development. And then these days, primarily when we're talking about this, you're looking at something like an Ethereum, ERC20, ERC721, something like that, which again, you're not paying fees to send it on the blockchain in, your CryptoKitty token or whatever. You're paying the layer one token, the Ethereum in the case of the Ether in the case of the Ethereum blockchain. Or in the case of Bitcoin, you'd be using Bitcoin in order to send your Tether or kind of whatever other type of token that might ride on top of that blockchain. So at the time, kind of that's what we were thinking about. And I started thinking about the concept of kind of meta coins or personal tokens, really around Let's Talk Bitcoin, right? The podcast that I started in early 2013, which then in 2014, I believe in January or February, we were executing to turn into a network and bring on a bunch of new shows that would use a personal token that we called LTB coin as sort of the way to reward people basically for their contributions to what was otherwise really a volunteer and very kind of ad hoc, laissez-faire, libertarian-y project. So I had been looking into kind of this idea since pretty early in the conversation. At the time, we were talking to people like Dan Larimer and Charles Hoskinson and Vitalik and a few other people whose names escape me at this point. And yeah, so we met in October of 2013 at a conference, And I remember sitting down with you after you did a performance and talking your ear off about my idea for label coins.
Oh, I
And
love that stuff. No wonder we got along. I never remember anything after a performance. There's like a dead air time. It's funny like that. But tell me more, because I
well,
mean, yeah, this was a passion project for me too.
I think that you then came and visited me. I think you came up to the house. That was the first time you, a couple of months later, and or maybe it was early in 2014. Yeah, I think it was early 2014. And we sat down by the creek and we talked about kind of artist coins and all these different ideas. And basically, the idea was that you could create a token that would be able to give people access to and kind of encapsulate the value that you were creating through the art. And my idea originally was really based around this idea of like a label coin, right? Which was what would become a bunch of artist coins all kind of put together into one thing. Because one artist's output is, like even the most prolific artist, you're ultimately not going to release a whole bunch of albums per year, right? Like it takes time. It's an art. But if you turn this into something that is about a label, then you can almost have these kind of distributed label relationships with all sorts of different access and different cross promotions, and value that grows not just based on one person's career, but on sort of the total aggregate of all of the people's careers who are participating in this. And so it was really sort of this interesting idea of how do you, the problem we were trying to solve, of course, was, well, so Bitcoin or Ether are valuable because if you want to send something on their blockchain, well, you need some of that token. And so that means that they're kind of inherently valuable because even if you have no other use for them, well, you can still use them to send some of that token. With artist coins or with any token that's a meta coin or is not kind of the primary token, that's not true. And so it presents both challenges on one side and advantages on the other side. The challenge is that, like I said, no inherent value, right? But the advantage is that you don't need to pay miners with some of the token. And so it means that you can create as many of this token as you want. And while it's not inherently valuable, any way that you can make it valuable, well, you can pretty much do what you want with it. And you don't have to worry about creating a system where the economics work for the thing that you want to do and also paying the miners to run the blockchain. So this was something that kind of in the run up to sort of the Metacoin protocols and Ethereum launching about a year later, like that, it was just not possible, right? This was, you had to have miners. Every token that was out there was a layer one token because there was no other path forward. And as I was gearing up to launch LTB coin, I was trying to rationalize this and figure out, all right, well, how do I do this token while on the other hand, I have to have miners that are going to be mining my specific blockchain? And isn't this competing with Bitcoin? Why do I want to do that? And so tokens were kind of the solution to that. So, but drawing back from kind of the experience that we had with LTB coin, like let's just talk about artist coins in general.
So, and do we want to say that we were using Counterparty? Because I think that's also kind of part of the equation, right? Because
sure.
Ethereum wasn't available yet, and Counterparty was built on top of Bitcoin. So there were some challenges.
I don't know if you remember the so early on, right? If you wanted to do a metacoin, there were basically two options. There was Mastercoin, now called Omni, on one side, and there was Counterparty on the other side. And Mastercoin had fundraised, right? They had raised about $500,000, which was an incredible amount of money, the first ICO ever, for building out this protocol. And then we ran into a Bitcoin bubble in the months after they had funded while they were staffing up. And that money just about 10x. So they wound up with $5 million or something close to that to build out this protocol. And Tatiana, I don't know if you remember, but we had a bunch of meetings with the Mastercoin people trying to kind of get them to see the value in this thing that we were doing. And provide some support for us as they had for kind of some of the other early ICOs built around more kind of tech startup projects. And by the end of it, we both kind of decided that actually that wasn't the path that we were going to take, and that we would rather not take any money, but have a lot of control over our project and use the Counterparty protocol, which was kind of like a equal and opposite reaction to Mastercoin. A lot of people who had worked on the Mastercoin project in the early days had decided that they didn't think that the money was being spent particularly well. And so they kind of just as a proof of concept created their own token system to do these meta coins. But anyways, without getting too much lost in the weeds, yeah, we wound up using Counterparty and walking away from kind of any support that we possibly could have had to have more control over it. There's a lot more infrastructure that I don't think it's probably worth going into. There's Amos Mieri with the kind of My Coins project, which I ended up as a co-founder on for a minute, which was basically a very early crowdfunding platform that used tokens, and where we actually launched Tatiana Coin. And I remember we borrowed the model for that, for the kind of way we, oh man, there's so much detail here that probably isn't relevant, but we didn't have just a straightforward like token sale, right? We followed the BitShares model, which would later become the EOS model, which was effectively a daily auction, where there was a fixed number of the token that was going to be released on a daily basis, and everybody would kind of bid for their portion of it. And it was this sort of proportional thing. So,
It was so complicated, though.
it was
Nobody
complicated.
Understood. I didn't even understand.
It was complicated. It was successful in that we raised the money, but in terms of just figuring, and again, like thinking back to this was like early 2014, like summer of 2014, like again, comparing where we were then to kind of where the space is now, like we were so far ahead of our time. It's just not even funny. But I mean, like it was successful in that we raised the funds to actually execute on the project. But again, just so many learnings, and just it's so hard to recognize how early we were until, you're looking back 7 years later, and you're like, wow, like I can't believe that that's the thing that we were doing at that point.
Yeah,
So, but
absolutely.
Tatiana, I have a question for you, because you and I have disagreed a lot over the years in terms of what's the kind of path forward to do these artist coins. Tell me what you wanted artist coins to be and how you wanted to do artist coins. What was the value someone was going to get?
So, okay, there have been a lot of variations on this, but to me, the best thing that I think is Tatiana Coin, because it solved the two main things that I wanted it to solve, which was fans and funding, right? It connected you with your fans. You didn't have to, be connected through Facebook or some other, social media platform. It was a direct connection to your fans, and you could grow that audience in a sustainable way, and that they could support you. So sort of like an Indiegogo or a Kickstarter campaign, people would donate in order to get Tatiana Coin, and then they would basically be able to spend it in my store. They would get a discount. And there was always this kind of baseball card element that became a little bit touchy, right? Because there was an idea that if there's a fixed amount of these coins and they become collectible, they should go up in value, right? And then my fans would get some kind of benefit from that. But it wasn't really something that we could lean on, because there was just so much, there was such a lack of clarity around the legal issues, and we've finally come to a little bit more, visibility there, right? Because it's a path that's fraught with peril. But what I love about artists being able to get, supported by their fans is then they're not beholden to anybody in their message. But the other problem that we found was that if you're an artist and you have fans that happen not to have money, you're still not going to get that juice. That's why I was always interested in the recording label coin, because you could pool all the artists together, and you don't have the I don't know, you can basically make the risk less risky by just investing in one artist.
So you've said the word a couple of times, but I remember it a little bit differently than you do. I think that what you're describing is more of the viewpoint that I kind of forced on the situation because of our risk aversion. In the early days, the whole focus of artist coins and the whole kind of theory behind why people would buy personal tokens had a lot to do with investment, right? It had a lot to do with someone who thought that your work was good and underappreciated, who thought that you would find a larger audience at a later point, being able to give you money now in something that would then appreciate. So like actually very similar to like an IPO kind of. And at the time we weren't calling them ICOs, but that's sort of the thing that really I think was very attractive. And even if you talk to people today, like they're like, oh, well, why would I buy, a personal token from someone? And the natural thing is because I want an interest. I want some shares that give me, you know, revenue when this person makes money or is more valuable at a later date. And so that that desire, I think, has underpinned most of ICOs and, you know, most of, because again, it's like, how do we do this whole investing thing but using tokens? Because tokens, if you take it back to kind of the basics, the thing that's really different and useful about tokens is that they're a way to represent ownership on the internet in a way that can be transferred from one person to another without having to have the person who issued the share or the token or whatever be involved with that. And that's something that before tokens was impossible. And if you look at what Bitcoin is money, but what the Bitcoin blockchain does is it's really a way to transfer ownership of money on the internet. And that's something that if you know, are trying to do it without like your bank getting involved or whatever, like good luck. And in the early days of Bitcoin, a story that I remember a lot, one of my first experiences trying to buy it was you basically had to put cash in an envelope and then send it to somebody in Washington, D.C. who went by Bitcoin Morpheus. Who would then send you some Bitcoin before kind of the advent of Bitcoin exchanges. And I didn't do that because it seemed super sketchy. But like, that's kind of where we were. This whole transfer of ownership of money thing, like on the internet, it just doesn't work unless you have like a bank that's fundamentally involved. And then you're not really transferring ownership. You're telling the bank transfer ownership, and the bank is actually keeping track of it the whole time. Well, tokens make that possible for everything, just like Bitcoin makes it possible for money. So what we have is this method to transfer ownership, and people are like, well, shares, obviously, we should be doing kind of shares, and then an investment is like a real investment, but without all the regulatory stuff, because these aren't shares, these are tokens. And so at the time, you know, like there was this total just like black hole, right, in terms of like an answer to that question. And if you asked lawyers who were outside of the space, well, they would have told you fundraising is fundraising. It doesn't matter what mechanism you use to get from here to there. It's ultimately, if you're fundraising, you have to kind of follow these rules. But upfront, for many of us who did not have a background in professional fundraising, that was not at all clear. And even a lot of the kind of early crypto lawyers didn't really express that perspective as the thing. So, you know, we took a kind of ultra conservative perspective just because I'm a pretty risk averse guy, despite being, you know, really kind of despite being, you know, a person who's enthusiastic about cryptocurrencies and these technologies. But yeah, that's kind of the on the one side, like the obvious use case that everybody wants to do is that I want to invest in an artist and I want the artist to, you know, to get that money, be able to do the thing. Now they don't need to take on weird label relationships. They don't need to take on traditional investment money, because I'm not only an investor, I'm a fan. And that kind of opening up of the potential token market from someone who just wants you, you know, to buy your music to someone who thinks that you're a good investment for the future, that's a huge new market that's never been available to artists in this way. We've seen it for larger artists. Bowie bonds get talked about a lot, something which David Bowie issued, which was a traditional bond. You know, and then on the other side, more recently, with STO's securitized token offerings, this is effectively taking the token vehicle on a blockchain and then wrapping it in and to a certain extent hobbling it with compliance with the existing legal system, right? The existing kind of compliance system around that. And, you know, the project that kind of comes prominently to mind there is Spencer Dinwiddie, who's a basketball player, basically tried to tokenize his contract, his 3-year contract, which was worth millions and millions of dollars. And then he sold tokens built around that that would get revenue from him. And there were certain kind of bonuses and stuff like that. And he was actually able to get it all the way through the NBA. It took like 9 months of negotiation over there, and launched it earlier this year. And I think that they just announced that it had closed, but it closed having sold like 10% of what he was intending to sell. So the challenge about, so I mentioned that like these securitized token offerings, they're legal, but the challenge with them is that they suck, right? Like they're terrible, right? It's like, I'm totally serious about that. Like, so for Tokenly, the company that you and I have worked with a lot to kind of develop out a lot of these use cases, we prepared a traditional ICO in 2017, and then we prepared a Reg D securitized token offering in early 2018. And we did the securitized token offering because we realized that the way we were going to do the fundraiser, like, it wasn't illegal. We had a working product. Everything was good like that. But there was so much uncertainty around whether or not that was okay and where that line was. So we were like, all right, well, let's play it safe and be legal. So then we went through all the diligence to do this Regulation D token offering. And I got to the end of the process and realized that you wouldn't be able to use the token in any sort of system. So all of the things that we wanted to use the token for, you couldn't do. You couldn't even give the token to most people. You couldn't tell most people that the token existed. The only people who were allowed to buy the token had to already basically be rich, right? Had to be accredited investors. And so, like, all the reasons why a token is so much better than a share, just like a traditional custodial share, they go out the window when you have to apply traditional custodial share rules to them. And if you look at projects like Blockstack, which did I believe the first Reg A plus, which is like it's a more expensive, more time consuming, but way to do a legal token offering, but you can raise more money and you can sell it to normal people, and those normal people can talk about it, right? You still can't use it in most systems. You still can't actually give it to people. I think that they're like 9 months on from when they actually sold them, and they haven't delivered any of them, again, because of the rules surrounding these securitized token offerings, but it's possible, right? So that's the problem, is that on the one hand, the obvious use case that everybody wants to do is this whole tokenized investing thing. And on the other hand, the only way that you can legally do it makes it so the token is friggin' worthless and that nobody has anything that they can do with it. It stops being anything other than just another way to represent a traditional share with all of the downsides that are entailed by that. So in the interim years, right, before, but after 2013, but before this last pretty much year and a half where securitized token offerings have become an actual thing, even though they're not actually getting much play, they're still an actual thing. We came up with lots and lots of different ways that you could use tokens, both as products and as kind of community coalescing tools, and as collectibles. I've got a whole list here, and for crowdfunding, stuff like that. Different ways
Access
that you
tokens.
That's right, access tokens, different ways that you could give value to a token, as an artist, or really as anybody in any sort of industry. And so I think that's what we're mostly going to talk about today. But do you remember that now, Tatiana? All the kind of investing. I think I've just beaten that out of you over the years of shooting down that idea over and over again.
Well, I think that there were a lot of different things that kind of played into that idea. It was so new at the time. And yeah, I agree that that would be the best option, but you don't have to necessarily innovate in that one specific direction. I think that, I mean, people are probably listening to this like, what's Tokenly? So Tokenly, Adam founded it after we just were kind of banging our heads against the wall with this. It was like when we made Tatiana Coin, it was like a car without any roads.
Yeah.
So we had to build the roads. But I really like the different kinds of use cases that have been built out, and they seem to be being reaffirmed in the outside market. Why don't you give people who are maybe not familiar with the different artist use cases, maybe a little bit more of an in-depth breakdown about what they look like? What is an NFT, right? For somebody who doesn't know, let's start with that one, for example.
Yeah, sure. So NFT means non-fungible token, and non-fungible token in normal human language means a collectible, right? The thing about, like an ERC20 token or something that you would build on Counterparty or Mastercoin or any of these other protocols is that the token itself is uniform, right? It's fungible. So it's like if you have 10,000 Tatiana coin, then every Tatiana coin is the same and largely indistinguishable from any other Tatiana coin. This is really useful if you want something like a kind of digital coupon, or you want something that acts like a currency, because in that case, all of these things should be, basically indistinguishable from each other, because if you're going to use them like money, you don't want to be like, all right, and then I spend this bill, and then I spend this bill. So instead, you have kind of a fungible token supply. Non-fungible tokens almost emerged out of an attempt to avoid avoid something that
Prosecution?
looked like money. Yeah, right. Like it was like, again, during this period of uncertainty, people are like, well, we know we want to do tokens. We know that under certain circumstances, doing fungible tokens can look like money or money transmission. And we had for a long time been kind of using this whole, well, they're baseball cards, right? Because every baseball card, like each individual, like design, that might be unique. But the individual cards, like that you're, pulling out of a pack, well, those aren't all individually numbered because that's not how baseball cards or many other collectibles work. But the idea here was that, well, if you had a token where every single token could be unique, and this one's blue colored and this one's purple with spots and stuff like that, then that definitely doesn't look like money. And if it definitely doesn't look like money, then probably this is something that we can legally do. The downside about that approach is that from like how much information you're putting onto the blockchain, and that's how expensive it can be to administer or use these types of tokens, is very expensive. Because if you want to send 15, baseball cards to someone, well, if each of these baseball cards is, fungible, then you just send 15 of this card. But if each card is unique and has its own serial number associated with it or other types of information, then that's 15 on the blockchain transactions that you need to make, 15 individual records that need to be kept on the blockchain. And there need to actually be 15 different cards, even though they're all the same designed card. So good for collectibles, good for kind of getting out of the way of, of kind of the legal uncertainty that we had for a very long time, and to lesser or greater degree still exists today. There's still a lot of uncertainty in this area. We know that if you want to do securitized fundraising, if you want to do like a real, traditional equity fundraiser type thing, then that needs to be a securitized token offering. But for all this stuff that, like what about a token that looks like a product, right? Like that is still actually pretty unclear. And it's unfortunate, but that's kind of just the reality of where we are. One of the big advantages, though, is that for all of those downsides, each card is unique. And so it means that, you can design systems that are really, really, really complex and that have a lot of kind of variability into them. So I really actually like the CryptoKitties, and it's not the only example, certainly, but it's a great example because CryptoKitties enables you to there's a randomness element that goes into it, right? Where each cat is not only unique, but has all these different characteristics that can sort of be randomly rolled and then associated with that one. And then you can track hierarchy. You can track kind of lineage going from this cat to this cat to this cat to this cat. And kind of see the family tree spread out, which is something that if all of your tokens are fungible, well, you can't really see that at all. That's just not the way they work. So collectibles on the one side, and then also because they're collectibles, it means if they're desirable, then you can use them to fundraise, right? Because you're selling collectibles and they don't have that fungible element. So it's not like you're going to go on to, Binance and, suddenly throw all your CryptoKitties onto there, right, to sell on the cat market, because that's not how it works. Mostly these things trade in DeFi environments, again, just because otherwise you have to have so many listing pairs, right? It's not listing CryptoKitties against Ethereum. It's listing every CryptoKitties against Ethereum, and each one would need its own market unless you really change the way that these markets fundamentally work. Did I miss anything, Tatiana?
No, I think that was pretty good. I want to talk about a few more use cases, but you talk about protocols and CryptoKitties. Sometimes, and what we experience with Tatiana Coin, sometimes the fees get really high. So your approach has been to be neutral about the protocol. Is that harder to build? Like, why don't more people, instead of picking a horse in the race and say, oh, I want Ethereum to win, or even EOS or something a little bit more modern, why aren't you in that race? And do you think that that's possible? Can you really adjust the technology in order to move in that way?
Yeah, so I was on my Friendster account the other day, and no, I wasn't. But that's
I had a Friendster account. Don't shame me.
It's illustrative of the point. Like my Friendster account, my MySpace account, all of these different things. We don't know what protocol is going to win the race here. We know that there is going to be a winner because there's something very useful about the ability to do, tokens and the ability to represent things. And again, getting back to basics, the ability to do ownership on the blockchain in a way that's transmissible. But we don't know who's going to win. We don't even really, like, most of these technologies are in just absolutely intense development. So early on, we built on Counterparty in large part because Counterparty was the one thing that was available that we could actually use to kind of build it out. But later we would integrate Ethereum, and again, there have been a number of other protocols that we've considered, but nothing's really kind of increased to that level yet. So yeah, I think to your actual question, the challenge of building something in a way that's kind of blockchain agnostic, as we like to say, is that you have to step away from this idea that everything is going to be decentralized. And you have to step away from this idea that just because we can do everything on the blockchain, or at least most things on the blockchain, that's the best path. And if you remember, man, I remember in 2017, we just got slapped in the face with on-chain fees trying to do everything on top of Bitcoin. You know, we had transaction fees. Ethereum's going through this right now. You know, transaction fees up above $1. Again, because there's so much demand for the space. But back in the day, I remember we were seeing Bitcoin transactions that were oftentimes $10, $20 in terms of transaction fee if you wanted to get confirmed in a reasonable amount of time. And that just completely blew our models out of the water. All of our assumptions around $10, tokens that represent an album worth of music, stuff like that. Like, that just doesn't work if you have to pay $20 in order to send somebody something. And it doesn't even work if you have to pay like $1, right? Like the cost, once it starts to scale up, can get really high really fast. So agnostic, right? We're on that. So what do I want to say next? So there's so it's a lot of that. It's a lot of, once you realize that most of these ideas just don't work on the blockchain if every single thing that you do has to have a transaction associated with it, then you pull back and you're like, all right, well, we'll build server-based tools that interact with blockchains, but that can have kind of a common user experience. And the thing that we got from that I don't think we anticipated up front was just how much better the user experience can be if you're not asking people to engage with blockchains. Because even today, we see it in the DeFi ecosystem, and it's not just that. There's so many different applications that are built kind of with this smart contract first approach. And the downside about that is that while we're really excited about this technology and we're willing to jump through hoops in order to use the technology to kind of try out these new things, normal people aren't. And once you start building kind of applications or projects that are intended for early majority users rather than kind of early adopter users, which is what I think most of the projects out there are still building for, you start to realize that it's just a non-starter to build everything on the blockchain. And then you also can act as a connecting layer between different blockchains and give people choice. Because again, like the idea that there's just going to be one blockchain, I think we're well beyond that. I think that there are going to be lots of blockchains that will specialize in different things. Some will compete with each other. Others will do something entirely different. And platforms that want to use tokens should be thinking about, how do we use not necessarily one platform, what platform should we be using, and what can those platforms accomplish that might be unique or desirable for our users?
Right. And so talking about users adoption, right? I had a really hard time getting people to understand what Tatiana Coin did. And I still, no, actually, it's gotten a lot easier now because the concept's been somewhat explored. But, how do you get people to participate? I have family and friends that are trying to buy Bitcoin on Coinbase. They can't even do that. How are they supposed to interact with their favorite artists? Even if they love them, what's the deal with the network effect? What's been your experience there? Because I think it's an ongoing problem that a lot of different crypto companies are having.
I mean, it is. Like, again, it's interesting because a lot of the stuff that we worked on, I was like, oh, we were so early. And I look around today and it's like, well, we're still so early. Like, I still haven't seen anybody actually pull off and have any sort of commercial success with any of the ideas that we worked on or any of the projects sort of that we went down the rabbit hole on. And I think it is in large part that. One is just the friction that you get when you add a token to anything, when you add a blockchain to anything. There's an educational component that either has to come into play or it has to be such a background feature that you don't need to explain it because the person doesn't need to know unless they really want to. And that's kind of the tactic that we've wound up taking after a while, was to really kind of build with sort of a centralized user experience first that then references to blockchains as a layer of truth, right? Again, it's not about doing everything on the blockchain. It's using the blockchain for that thing that it's really good for, which is tracking ownership and making it so ownership can be transferable without all of the challenges that come from doing that on the kind of common internet. I like to say that, like when you buy an ebook, like you think that you own that ebook, but you actually don't own that ebook at all. You have purchased a license to consume that ebook, you personally to consume that ebook, which is non-transferable and which can only be exercised under very specific circumstances. So that's the paradigm that we have to get away from. This idea that ownership on the internet is somehow different than ownership in real life. But that's also the reason why, like, there's no such thing as a used bookstore for ebooks, right? Like, that just doesn't exist. And because of that, it actually creates a weirdly distorted marketplace where the only thing that you can buy is something that's brand new. And once you've bought it, well, it might have personal utility value to you, but it has no resale value. It has no sort of like tangible value that you can capture. And if you look at what the courts have said about this, they've actually said that you do have the right to resell this, but what you don't have the right to do. So there was this court case a couple of years ago for this company that basically created an algorithm using a bunch of, I believe, Harvard, mathematicians and stuff like that. I don't know, some sort of Ivy League school to allow you to take your iTunes music and then to sell it to someone else. And it would be deleted from your library at the same time that it was added to somebody else's library, and the company took 40% of the transaction. So it was not a fantastic deal, but it still made something possible that was impossible before. And the record labels took the company to court, and the company lost, and then they appealed, and then they lost again. And the takeaway was that you buy music on iTunes, you're allowed to sell that music. What you're not allowed to do is to make a copy of it. And the way that computers work is that if you transfer something from one folder to another folder on a different hard drive just within your computer, it is being copied and copied to the new file and deleted from the old file. And so because of this sort of technical way that it works, the only way that you can actually legally exercise your right to sell the thing is if you sell the hard drive that the song is actually contained on. And then you're not making a copy, you're taking the original copy that you purchased and you're selling it to someone else, and then they can legally do that. But of course, who's going to do that? Who's ever going to be like, oh, hang on, I want to sell this song to you, so let me just give you my original hard drive. And we're not going to like have a different hard drive for every song just because you might want to sell one song and not another. It's a crazy standard, but it goes to show that there's a technical problem associated with how digital content can be resold. But from a rights perspective, it's there. You can legally do it. The courts have already said it. It's just you can't do it without something like a token. And the reason why a token sort of really solves this problem is because when you are buying a token, right, when you possess a token, what that token represents is a license. And that license itself is what's transferable. And that license, just like when you consume music off of Spotify or whatever, you pay a monthly fee to Spotify, and then you can consume, stream, or download kind of any songs that you want off of that. So, right. So the point is that you don't necessarily own that song, but you have a license to consume that song. And so what these tokens represent then is a license to consume the song. And so long as you possess it, then you can use it within a streaming service like the ones that we've created at Token FM. To consume it. But if you transfer it to someone else, well, you no longer have the license, so you can no longer access it through the streaming service, but somebody else can. And so again, it's taking that fundamental blockchains are about transmission of ownership and maintaining records of ownership, as a means to do something that is otherwise impossible to do on the internet.
Okay, so I have a couple more things before we wrap up, because I want everybody to have some time to absorb this. This is a pretty intense episode. I'm psyched. But rights management, people always talk about using the blockchain to do rights tracking. We built that into what we do, but I've never felt like that's such a compelling offering for artists, only because most artists won't really make enough money to be that concerned about their copyright in the first place, just from a practical perspective, but it certainly is a really big component of the music industry. So do you want to speak to some of the rights management issues that we've come across?
Yeah, so rights management, running down all of these rabbit holes, trying to really solve some problems, led me to understand just how broken so many legacy systems are, and just how there's the part you see, which is what works, and then there's all the part that's in the background, that's the gum and shoelaces, that's actually how it works. And so rights management is not a technology problem. It's an industry problem. And to a larger extent, it's almost a regulatory problem because of the kind of rules that Congress has put in place about what you can and can't do with sorts of rights management. It's also a really scary problem to tackle, as we discovered, because if your company does something or provides a platform that can be sort of used to infringe on rights, then it's one of the very few areas of law where somebody suing you can pierce the corporate shield, which is typically, if you're suing a company, you sue the company. But if you can pierce the corporate shield, as in this case, then it means you can go after the officers of the company personally as well as the company. So it's kind of this terrifying thing, because even if you're attempting to do something right, but you get it wrong or somebody abuses your service, you can find yourself personally liable, which is a weird situation to have in this sort of business. So rights management, I actually think that it's a really compelling use case. Just because of how broken the system is. And like, if you want to, if like right now, the way that all this stuff is tracked on the internet is all kind of after the fact, right? So you upload something and it goes on YouTube, and YouTube has no idea who owns that song. YouTube has no idea who needs to be paid if that song is used. It has no idea what it's allowed to do with it, because none of that information is inherent to it. And using a blockchain, you can kind of reverse that, where instead of saying, all right, well, everything is going to be after the fact, using algorithms to crawl through and then send takedown notices, you can instead be like, okay, well, here's the song, it's on the blockchain. You can get the provenance to show that you're the one that actually uploaded it first. You can have all of the metadata in there, which basically means who you pay, how you can use it, under what conditions. And that takes a lot of the manual element out of it. Whereas right now, if you want to, like cover a song or something like that, right? Or do a collaboration, or do a remix, like that's something where you kind of almost have to go and talk to the artist and get their permission, or their people, and get their permission. Whereas if all of this information was just out there, then it doesn't require, it means the possibility for so much more stuff to happen becomes easy, right? Because all the rules are out there. And if all the rules are out there, then so long as someone is following the rules, they're not infringing. And so there's a lot kind of easier path towards doing whatever it is that you want while still respecting the artist's rights. So again, there have been a lot of projects that have attempted to do this. And I think one of the big problems is that they try and use the blockchain for everything. And when you use the blockchain, not just for the record storage, but for, the actual interface by which people interact with this, you need an identity yourself on the blockchain in order to do any of this stuff. Then you're taking something that's an improvement and you're stacking a layer on top of it that's much, much, much worse than the way that things are if you weren't doing that. And so again, it comes back to this whole, we have to move away from everything happens on the blockchain. And we have to move towards this. We use the blockchain for the parts that it's really good at, but we present these ideas and these possibilities to people in ways that they actually understand and will find to be more useful and less frictional, I don't know, easier to use than kind of the current path forward, which is so not the case with the majority of projects.
Okay, so we're coming up on the hour. I have two questions, but I'm only going to give you one.
Yeah.
So Tokenly more broadly has actually found a place with the e-commerce side. So like I said earlier, the tech is very kind of flexible. Can you talk to me a little bit about why that's such a hot thing? Why do people need crypto for e-commerce? Can't they just get WooCommerce and call it a day?
Yeah, so this all gets back to the whole, this goes back to the very beginning. So I didn't intend to start a technology company called Tokenly. I wound up starting Tokenly because when we were doing Tatiana Coin and when we were doing LTB Coin and many of kind of the early token projects, we realized that while it was possible to do the token part of it, if you wanted to do anything with the token or you wanted it to be useful in any way, then none of those tools existed. And there weren't even wallets that could hold these things for the most part. So what we did with Tokenly was we basically just went down a big giant list of here are all the things that we wish we could do with tokens. And then, we created tools around that. So one of the first things that we created was an auction tool. And the auction tool was, very similar to eBay in that you would place bids and then it would there'd be an auto bidding thing. But at the time it was all on the blockchain. This is before I had that epiphany. And more importantly, the thing that it allowed you to do is to bid in tokens that might not necessarily have a price. And that was the same thing with the e-commerce side. First we built this tool called Swapbot, which was basically a fully on-chain token vending machine system where you could set up, I have this token and I'd be willing to accept this token or this token or this token. And you set up different prices in each token because you might value the tokens differently. And then we had token markets, and tokenmarkets.com was really intended to be it was intended to make it so that like if you want to accept, $10 and $10 worth of Bitcoin and 10 Tatiana Coin, right? And those are all prices that you would accept for one of your albums. You could have a single storefront that would allow you to accept credit cards, would allow you to accept dollar-denominated amounts of Bitcoin or Ethereum, and would also allow you to arbitrarily set prices in Tatiana Coin or any of these other types of tokens. And that's something that we really didn't want to build because it was a complex project, but there was nothing out there that existed that could do that. And to my knowledge, there still is nothing out there that exists that could do that. Token markets right now actually isn't operating. COVID-19 has had actually a deleterious effect on our business because it slowed down deal flow a lot. And so one of the deals that we've been working on over the last year is just waiting for this to let up. So we're not operating right now, but that's the thought behind token markets and why, frankly, it's been such a necessary part of the ecosystem for people who have those types of use cases. Simply put, there's nothing else out there that can do anything like it. And then Tokenly, aside from that, man, we probably built 19 or 20 different applications, most of them back-end tools. We built identity management systems that would allow you to basically, we haven't really talked about access tokens at all, but just real quickly, access tokens are this idea that you have a token and rather than getting value from spending it, you get value from possessing it. And then it acts basically like a tradable password that you can use to access a private forum or you can use to access, your music. Tatiana, we created tokens that represented each of your albums. And when someone purchased those, they were then able to consume that music, but still have the ability to resell it to someone else if they wanted to, who could then themselves consume the music. What's another fun one? We haven't really talked about Token FM much at all. But I think we're going to have to do another episode on that at some point.
Yeah, we're going to have a part 2 because there's a lot to get into.
There's a lot more. Yeah, we didn't even get through our list.
Oh, well, we tried.
Well, it was a good start.
I think that this is such a good conversation. I'm so happy that you were able to join me today, Adam. And I think that maybe this will offer an opportunity for the audience to think this through and maybe send in some questions to the TatianaShow.com. Waiting for your questions there. If people want to connect with you, Adam, where can they find you?
Let's see. Adam at ltbshow.com is a good way to reach me personally. I'm on Twitter, but I very infrequently use it. I'm at GamerAndy. And yeah, I think it's a great idea. Yeah, if anybody has any questions about any of these types of token systems or other use cases for that, we didn't talk about token vinyl at all, which is something that I frankly love. But we can talk about that next time. Then yeah, let's do another one.
Okay, that sounds good. Thanks so much, Adam. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Tatiana.
Bye.
What's the point of all this technology without a little love in our lives? Our hosts, Tatiana Moroz, Dr. Stephanie Murphy, and Lauren Kasovitz, have come together to bring you Proof of Love. Go to proofoflovecast.com. The Tatiana Show has been brought to you by CryptoMediaHub.com, a boutique marketing and PR agency for Bitcoin and beyond. It's time for the show, the Tatiana Show, where you make friends and talk life and crypto. We gotta think and reflect and use lots of intellect with our hearts when we work together. I know that it can be so hard out there, looking all around and saying that life ain't fair. So that is why we will fight and stay up late at night, listening to the Tatiana Show. Thank you for listening to the Tatiana Show. Please follow us on Twitter at Queen Tatiana or on Facebook and Instagram at Tatiana Moroz Music. More episodes can be found at thetatianashow.com, and make sure you leave a review on iTunes and tell your friends. You are listening to The Tatiana Show. This show may contain adult content, language, and humor and is intended for mature audiences. If that's not you, please stop listening. Nothing you hear on The Tatiana Show is intended as financial advice, legal advice, or really anything other than entertainment. Take everything you hear with a grain of salt. Oh, and if you're listening to us on an affiliate network, the ideas and views expressed on this show are not necessarily those of the network that you're listening on or of any sponsors or any affiliate products you may hear about on this show.